actually ask just like a genuine question to the people of the United States right now with everything that's happening around current situations in the world.
Yes, absolutely. What's your question?
Do you guys remember that there are so many more of you than there is of him? Do you remember, though, what would happen if you all just went on strike and just didn't comply? What would happen to people in the military if they just went on strike and didn't comply? Genuine question. Not even coming from like a space of like humor, not even coming from a space of like trying to like mock you in any way. Genuine question. What would happen? And do you guys remember that there are so many more of you than there is of him? Because right now, the way that this guy is leading you and your nation, we are heading towards another world war. I need you all to understand this because it's very important.
Okay, I appreciate that this is a genuine question, so I will answer it with a genuine response. First of all, we in the United States are keenly well aware of what a dire situation this is. After all, we are living it out within our borders. We are living in a country where a would-be dictator, an outright fascist, is trampling on all of our rights, is carrying out an ethnic cleansing, is destroying our economy, our children's futures, dismantling education, removing access to healthcare for all this. Believe me, we understand in the United States what our lived experience is. We understand the severity of Donald Trump's actions against Venezuela. We understand. And I understand the anxiety from people outside of the United States. I understand the desire to just like shake us a little bit and say, y'all can stop this. There are 340 million of us, and there's a couple hundred of those fuckers over there. A significant portion of my audience on YouTube is not from the United States. And so I hear a lot of this from people in Canada and in Europe, especially, sometimes in New Zealand and Australia, but it's primarily Canada and Europe. And much of that frustration is so justified because the only people who can stop this are the American people. That's the reality of the situation. But I do think sometimes people outside the US really dramatically oversimplify the problem, and they sort of lack an understanding of what it's like for Americans and the reasons that as of this moment, we have not carried out those big heavy lifts that could shut this down. I'm somebody who has been calling for things like a general strike, for big disruptive labor actions, big disruptive economic actions for, let's see here, 11 and a half months. I understand I'm right where you are when you say there's 340 million of us and there's not that many of them. Why is it that we aren't all just walking off the job? Why is it that the military is not just, dipping out, right? I get all of that. I likewise, a year ago, was frustrated with the fact that we were not seeing a million people in the streets like right away. Why is it that we were not having big labor stoppages? But you know what? I was operating at that point in time out of a little bit of magical thinking, a little bit of, I was engaging in a little bit of fantasizing about what would bring this all to a halt quickly. And the reality is that there is no short road out of this, especially in the United States. I know we just saw, what was it, like 1 million people in Portugal walk off the job for a day. Like I know that we see people in Europe take these kind of actions and we think, why can't Americans replicate this? And I think that there is a lack of understanding about a number of factors here. So let me try and lay them out as best as I understand it. As I've moved in the past year from my position of like, hey, where's the general strike? I'm super frustrated. Why isn't this happening yet? To like, oh, wait a minute. Here's all of the barriers that we have to remove in order to get to a place where we can do the heavy lift of a general strike, of big labor stoppages. That is a massive, massive lift. And you can't just do it because you want it to happen. Like when you want a general strike to happen, you have to be able to pull one off successfully. You cannot call for a general strike and not have laid all of the foundations for it to be successful. It would be devastating for there to be a big call for a massive strike, millions of people in the streets, and then it doesn't work. or the regime is able to abort it and cut it off, and we are unsuccessful. We have to make sure that when we call for that action, we have laid down all of the framework for it to be successful. And that has not happened yet for a number of reasons. And you might say, well, people in Europe are able to put together these large labor stoppages very quickly. Yeah, well, we don't have universal healthcare in this country. We don't have socialized medicine. Our healthcare is tied to our employment. That's by design, much harder for people to walk off the job, much harder for laborers to organize if they have their employer holding their healthcare over their heads. Not just the employees' healthcare, but healthcare for their children, as well as the Trump regime and the Republicans are rolling back Medicaid access all across the country. We don't have social safety nets here when it comes to healthcare. Likewise, Republicans have spent decades eroding the labor movement, infiltrating the labor movement. A couple of powerful unions in the last election failed to endorse Kamala Harris. And not only that, an awful lot of union members, especially in the Rust Belt, voted for Donald Trump, voted for a faux populist, we're looking at blue collar pro-union Americans voting for a billionaire. That is the state of things in the United States. And that has been decades in the making. That indoctrination has been decades in the making. In order to put on massive labor stoppages, you have to make sure that you are caring for the strikers. It's not so much the bus boycott, it's the bake sale, right? And in the United States, we have had literal centuries of baking toxic individualism into our psyches. We're not all that good at taking care of each other. Pandemic really did a number on disrupting those connections, and much of the work that's been done in terms of community organizing over the last year has been about reconstituting or building for the first time those support networks. We have to engage in those smaller actions. Learn to do mutual aid on a hyper-local level, undertake those actionable tasks where we can accomplish our goals, and then we level people up to bigger things. It's likewise the same reason that 5051 and Indivisible have had large one-day rallies, protests like No Kings and Hands Off. If you can't get people to show up on a Saturday for a 4-hour protest in massive numbers, how are you going to expect them to call off the job for weeks or months and to hold out as long as the strike organizers say we're stopping labor? Most Americans have never protested before, and also most Americans have never organized to provide and care for each other's needs before. I get why you're frustrated. I'm likewise frustrated. I would really like to speed the pace of things up quite a bit, but we can't call for a strike when we are not prepared to endure one all the way from the beginning to a successful end. I think it's good and right and important that we remind the American people that we have the power, that our power is lent to our leaders and they are meant to govern on our behalf. But if they're not doing a good job, if they're abusing that power, we can retake that power. I think too many Americans fail to understand where power originates and how it flows through this country. I think it's good and important for you and me and everybody else to remind us in the United States that the people actually have the power. But power is one thing, organization is another. And if you want your power to be wielded effectively, we have to organize. And I haven't seen us get to a point yet where we can do really big, heavy lifts like labor stoppages, like massive, prolonged protests. If that is our goal, if we want to be able to do those things, we need to start leveling up. We've been slowly leveling up over the last year, bringing people in, helping build their confidence and their skills, giving them small actions that they can undertake. We got to step it up real big, because too many establishment Democrats think that this is just going to get fixed in the midterms, and I don't think that. I think it's going to require big movements, big disruptive movements of the people. Thank you for nudging folks here in the United States, but please understand it's a more complicated lift than I think a lot of people in Europe especially understand. And we need to focus on removing those barriers, building those skills, creating the scaffolding so that when we call for big actions like labor stoppages, like big protests in the streets, that we're able to pull them off with great success.